Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had a very nice lunch, but not too nice, because I still hope that you will be awake enough to listen to the last panel of these PCI days. We have a very prominent, distinguished panel to discuss with us how to accelerate the implementation of the project of common interest. We have heard over the 2 days already different aspects of implementation, but the last panel today will focus on what can be done in order to facilitate, speed up the implementation. So we have a big panel looking at these issues from various angles, from financing angle, from project implementation angle, and also from the environmental legislation implementation angle. And I hope that will then trigger a very good discussion with all of you, as we've already had in the previous sessions. So I will now invite the panelists to come to the podium in the order of appearance in the agenda. So first one, Alexander Antoniuk from the EIB, European Investment Bank. He's a senior economist there, so please. Then next one is Beatrice Coda, who is the head of unit in the implementing executive agency INEA. I think all of you know her by now, so Bea, please. And next one, Milena Chleva, so head of project management department in the electricity system operator of Bulgaria, please. Then Rosemary Steen, director on external affairs in iGrid, Ireland. Then next one, Alexandra Meli, senior project manager from the Ministry of Energy and Water Management in Malta. And then the last, but certainly not the least, a colleague of mine from DG Environment, Paul Spite, head of unit of environmental enforcement issues. And without further notice, I will then give the floor to Alexander from the EIB on the EIB's view on acceleration of project. And you, as all of you, you may either speak from the armchair or you may come here to the podium.
Thank you for inviting us to this event. There are a lot of very experienced companies around here, of course, who know how to complete and accelerate projects. So I'll focus on what can be done to accelerate projects from the perspective of the EU Infrastructure Bank, i.e. from the perspective of a financier. Although we focus on financing, EIB has a substantial internal capacity in technical, environmental, procurement, and economic aspects of projects. So apart from using this expertise for appraising projects, helping promoters to develop projects and to monitor, we can also provide technical expertise via our hub. And also the hub can provide some small financing, or not so small, for technical assistance to projects. Also, to add a bit of a background of EIB and PCIs, I'll just give you kind of high-level statistics. In the last 5 years, we've financed 30 PCIs with a total of loans of 5 billion euros. Also, just a quick note, a consultation of our energy lending criteria review is currently running, and it's closing on 29th of March. So whoever haven't sent their comments yet, yeah, please do so. Since PCI is a project with cross-border effect, many of them require construction on two sides of the border in two countries. For example, interconnectors. I would like to share our experience financing such cross-border projects. Let's outline 3 different ways of how a project can be structured. So first way is you have 2 TSOs on each side of the border in 2 countries, and they construct to the border. So let's call it a TSO model. Second, imagine you have a structured finance SPV, structured project vehicle, set up by shareholders and which raises finance centrally. So let's call it a project finance model. And then third model, also a separate project company, but which raises funds through shareholders financing. For example, shareholders borrow and provide finance to the project company. Let's call it a SPV model. And the fourth model, which is not official, but we've seen in other projects, in some projects, where 2 TSOs set up kind of coordination unit or project implementation unit, where they almost informally can coordinate development. So what we notice is that maybe not so surprisingly, more centralized and coordinated project structures work better. So projects develop and are constructed faster. They're also, for us, easier to appraise and monitor. Since we're a policy-driven bank owned by member states, we assess such interconnectors as an entire project, even if we finance just one side of the project. Why we're doing so? Because to make sure that environmental social standards are met in all parts of the project, that the same goes for procurement. Also, that the project brings the expected economic benefit, but in order to achieve the expected economic benefit of an interconnector, of course, it needs to be constructed fully on both sides of the border. In the experience we had, now to add a few points on what can help to accelerate the projects. So, of course, political level coordination helps. So if at a high level in both countries, it's agreed that the project is priority and so there is a sort of political push, so of course it's moving faster. Also, in our experience, working together with European Commission helps a lot. So we, especially with DG ANA, we have often trilateral meetings, Commission, EIB and promoters. So that certainly helps to make projects move faster or even originate projects. That also happens. Also, I will add another often asked question. At what point should promoters come to EIB in order to develop a project? Should they apply for PCI first or get, procurement done? So the answer is as early as possible. So the earlier you come to EIB to discuss a project, the more potential issues can be eliminated early. So to conclude, we share the view that the Minister of Energy, Vaičiūnas, expressed yesterday, that PCIs should also be projects of common implementation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I think I liked your last sentence very much. It's the project of common implementation. That's as important as being identified as a project. You also need to work together to implement it. And also from yesterday, I think what fits very nicely to what you said is I think it was the Estonian representative from the ministry who said that if you want to go far, you go together. So was very, very nice. And I think that's what the PCIs are about. We want to go far and we want to go together. And EIB has been and continues to be an invaluable partner in implementing these projects. Next one then, Beatrice, please.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and thanks again for Catharina and for DG Energy to support, let's say, this event. We are very glad as INEA that we can contribute to the first edition of the PCI Day. My presentation will focus on CEF, so the Connecting Europe Facility program, its implementation. As INEA, we implement the program, so we are at the receiving end, and we work with the project promoters of PCI to support them to implement the actions contributing to the PCIs. So, in my first slide, I want to give you the state of play of where we are with the CEF Energy portfolio implementation. The instrument CEF, in particular we're talking of CEF grants, has been already recognized as an effective instrument to support the acceleration of the PCIs. Already, let's say, in the midterm evaluation of the program, and as well as also demonstrated in the provisional agreement reached by the Parliament and the Council on the follow-up of CEF as a part of a long-term EU budget. This slide shows you where we are with implementations. The EU funding allocated so far is in the order of 3.2 billion euro. CEF EU funding is contributing to the actions, so to activities implementing PCIs. So far we have 131 actions. They are divided between studies and works, and I will distinguish them immediately. And as you see, let's say the bulk of the funding goes to the so-called, to the works, so to construction. But we have a huge number of studies, so action supporting the early phase of a PCI. And while the bulk of the funding has been allocated to gas and electricity PCIs, recently we have, in INEA, we have been working on actions implementing smart grids and also CO2 projects, so CO2 transportation contributing to CCS, which is a new trend, which is very, very good. Let me distinguish how really, let's say, CEF is supporting and accelerating the PCI implementation. I talk about studies, I talk about works. Let's focus now on studies. Why a grant of CEF from the European Union budget accelerates a project with a study? We are talking of PCIs here in early phase when the promoters do not know how the project is going to evolve. There are many financial uncertainties, regulatory uncertainties. The promoters don't know if they will recover the costs of the studies. There might be technological risk associated to the choice of the technical and technological solution of the project. So all these are technical and financial risks that come in a very early phase. And it is proven also, let's say, by INEA, by the CEF, by the implementation and the monitoring of the CEF grants, that really this, let's say, this EU funding given in these early phases of PCIs help the project really to advance, and in several cases it is determinant to reach the final investment decision of the project. Now, what we are talking about here, we talk about feasibility studies that define the technical aspects, identifies really the viability of the project under different scenarios, what are the best options based on cost-benefit analysis, assessment of social, environmental, and financial aspects. We go further to front-end engineering design, which are the more specific technical design and technical documentation studies. That lead also to the preparation of procurement and execution phase, all the documentation associated to that. And last but not least, and very important, CEF finances quite a lot of what we can call permitting studies, that there are studies or environmental studies, for example. They contribute to streamline, if I may say so, complex permitting procedures that the PCI promoters face to prepare high-quality documentation in support also of the communication and the engagement with the relevant stakeholders, and therefore really to support this public acceptance process. So when the studies, in our experience, when the studies are well-targeted, well-focused, they last not for a very long time, then they really generally demonstrate high technical, high financial progress, and they can be effective. Going to PCIs, which are mature, so we CEF, and this is really where also the hype is of this instrument, also supports works via grants for works, but I'd really like to highlight here that the policy prescribes that these grants for works are really the instrument of the last resort. So the projects that only, let's say, projects with exceptional high-level degree of externalities at macro-regional level that are not commercially viable within the regulatory framework can apply for grants for works after having exhausted, as we have heard also yesterday from Mrs. Poletti from ACER, regulatory measures such as CBCA and incentives and regulatory incentives. And after all that, I join here, let's say, the word of the EIB, of Alexander. The financing gap has to be really closed by using financial instruments. So all these sources of funding, they have to be explored by project promoters before really applying for CEF. And let's say I join Alexander's words. The sooner all this financial planning is done before applying, the better it is, and it should not be underestimated. These actions for works, they cover, as all of you know, if you deal with large projects, mature PCIs, they last very long, many years. Crucial, let's say, detailed and, let's say, careful financial planning is really important. There is always the risk to go for cost overruns, and they have to be reacted, let's say, very, very quickly by the project promoter. I will not go into examples, let's say, of projects you've heard, many of them already here in the previous presentation. Milena will, and other speakers will continue on let's say, on this. But as a transition to, let's say, between the part of financing and funding and the presentation of the PCI promoters here, sorry, I have to, yes, I'd like to give you, let's say, maybe the last messages, especially if there are, let's say, promoters of PCIs in early phase, some, if you want, let's say, suggestions based and tips based from the experience that we have collected as INEA when we monitor let's say, the actions, what fits also into the monitoring of the PCIs for the Commission and for the regional groups and complements the institutional report of ACER. So the challenges that we see when we, let's say, when we discuss with project promoters, there are several ones. We have spoken about financial difficulties and the importance of very careful financial planning. Procurement is a major factor causing, let's say, delays and in some cases overspending. Delays can be very important if there is risk of appeals, and the risk is underestimated in many cases. So we always advise the promoters, our beneficiaries, to not to underestimate that and to comply really with public procurement rules when that applies and principles of sound financial management. We have heard another point, technical difficulties. We have heard yesterday the problems of the marine drilling in the canyon of Biscay Bay. So PCIs are exposed to many, let's say, in several cases, they are exposed to this kind of challenges. And also these are, let's say, things that should be anticipated as much as possible. Also, let's say, with good cooperation between the DTSOs, this is really what helps. And the last point, and very shortly, because it will be covered by the next speakers, is the permit granting, and that was also recalled this morning in the environmentally planning session. We have, let's say, a simplified TNE regulation with a one-stop shop approach, but in the implementation of the PCIs, in the INEA's experience, we see sometimes that, you know, the procedures are national or local procedures. They come on top of it, and that causes, you know, delays in this, which is, you know, not really welcomed. And also we encourage PCI promoters to really do not underestimate the, you know, the importance of public acceptance and to engage as early as possible with let's say, with the local communities. Voila, I hope I give you, let's say, some ideas and some examples how CEF contributes to address the obstacles of implementing PCIs, and that in, let's say, in several cases, really, it helps really to put the progress into, let's say, the good pace. So bringing PCIs to completion is, as we have heard these 2 days, challenging task, but a possible one with the cooperation, let's say, of all the stakeholders. Thank you, and I leave you, let's say, to the other speakers to present their views and experience their challenges and good practices also for PCI's implementation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bea. I think you highlighted perfectly the 2 elements. One is the, let's say, the money side, which one could easily say that if you have enough money, then everything is smooth, which is not the case. You know, we've seen many situations where the money is there, and usually it is there through tariffs, through EIB loans or CEF grants, and still there are hurdles in the way of implementation and delays in the implementation. So I think your last slide highlighted very importantly that we also need to look at all the aspects of project preparation, implementation, and cooperation. And that is perhaps even more important than, in the end, the CEF grants, which of course are important as well. We will then hear from Milena on these practices on how to work in a project in order to speed up implementation. So, please.
Thank you, Catharina, for the opportunity to share in such a big room our experience with the project of common interest. Electricity system operator is the transmission system operator of Bulgaria. We are a project promoter of 5 projects of common interest. They are divided into clusters. The cluster 37, it's a cluster between Bulgaria and Greece with 3 internal PCI lines and 1 interconnection between both countries. And the cluster 38, which is which cluster includes 3 PCIs, 2 on the Romanian territory and 1 in Bulgaria. Total length of the high voltage lines in Bulgarian territory is about 450 kilometers with a total investment of 287 million euro. I would like to invite everyone interested in our projects to come in the PCI garden. We have a very good floor with some informational brochures, so you can get more information on that. Pre-investment studies and permitting studies, as Beatrice said, for all these 5 projects are finalized already with the financial support of the CEF funds. The construction works are also supported by CEF with 88 million euro and by the Kozloduy decommissioning fund with the 15 million. So we have around 35% of the investment already supported by grants, and we will not have any financial problems with that. For everyone in this room, I'm sure it's not secret that the implementation of the activities funded by the EU funds is always linked to the very strict time schedule, and their compliance is not always an easy task. Actually, a few years ago, when I first presented to my colleagues Regulation 347 and the provision that and the provision for implementation of the old pre-investment and permitting procedures for a period of 3.5 years, all they say that I'm a dreamer, and that the complexity of the procedures did not allow this to be fulfilled in such a short time. Now, 4 years later, I'm proud that actually all my dreams became true. PCI 381 is already under construction since November last year. The construction of the rest lines will begin gradually till the end of this year. Actually, we have not encountered major technical issues and problems. We resolved all financial problems with the Connecting Europe facility. We have no encountered big differences with the public acceptance that our partners share these days with us. The critical and the main issues which we met during the implementation of the PCIs are mainly related to the delays. Delays caused by mainly, again, external factors. Delays in the coordination and approval of the permit documentation by authorities, delays in the procurement, delays and problems with the contractors, external contractors, and a lot of delays related to the land acquisition procedure. In order to resolve all the stated issues, we depended on internal company organization, including very well managed internal processes, strong management, team management, as well as flexibility and possibility to add resources on the critical part of the projects when it was needed. The main lessons that we learned, and I would like to share here in that room, is that if you want to be on the schedule, you always have to start earlier than it is planned and to add resources earlier than needed. Saying that, unfortunately, back in my, after me, I have a lot of bad examples. Already with our first project, for various reasons, amendments in the Public Procurement Act, some internal changes and others, we conducted a public procurement for a contractor to develop the main pre-investment and permitting studies with more than 8 months delay. In other words, we started without any buffer of time. In this situation, we prepared Plan B to speed up the implementation of the project by setting shorter deadlines in the contract for development of each of the studies, of each of the documents. Nevertheless, as all mentioned, as all these documents have to be coordinated with the authorities, municipalities, utilities, public, etc., and this coordination took longer than expected, and that is longer than it is foreseen in the legislation. We added further and further delays to the implementation. Then we prepared Plan C. We took a decision to start with the next study earlier, or in other words, before the final approval of the previous one. For example, while we was waiting for the preliminary detailed development plan to be approved, we initiated the process for the preparation of the technical design of the lines. This early acceleration of the upcoming stages was definitely the main factor for on-time implementation of all the pre-investment studies. This approach was taken by our company in the next permitting stages and for all the projects of common interests. Most of the activities in the time schedule are linked with others with a finish to start relationship. In many cases, we don't really need to wait until the first task finish, and we can take the opportunity to move forward with the second task early. For example, all the detailed designs of SO projects were implemented by external contractors. The contractors were requested to submit each part of the design for approval when ready, rather than to submit the full document. This way, once the separate part of the technical design was approved, it was given to a SO internal specialist to prepare the technical specification for the procurement procedure for the selection of the contractor for the construction. Here, I also would like to mention that we implemented the land acquisition procedures in parallel with the procurement selection process, so that our company can have the final construction permit at the selected contractor for the construction at the same time. All resources, especially the human resources assigned to the project, are of great importance for the successful implementation of and actually adding them at the right time is also a major and significant decision. As a promoter, we learned that we have to be flexible and to add resources to the activities on the critical part of the project. An example that I can give here is related to the implementation of detailed design for the project 381. The contractor selected for the job violated the conditions of the contract. They didn't complete the assignment just 1 month before the end date of the grant agreement. In regards to the occurred situation, we decided to terminate the contract. And in order to complete the task within the scheduled period, we assigned a team of internal and external, very experienced experts to finalize the task on time. Another example that I have, and maybe it's interesting for you, is related to the process of the land acquisition procedures. In October last year, the new legislation changes to the land acquisition process were introduced in Bulgaria. And in order to ensure timely completion, we assigned experts like energy ambassadors to all the municipalities on the road of the lines in order to support the municipalities in the process of introduction of these new legislative changes internally and, of course, of the public. And some additional points that we want to mention here and that are related to the ways to accelerate the PCI implementation internally. All the project promoters know that the things changes during the project progresses. For example, during the implementation of the electricity PCIs in Bulgaria, the last 2 years we experienced 2 changes in the Public Procurement Act, one of which is currently ongoing. Further to that, we was also an amendment in the Energy Act. We have new legislation related to the land acquisition, as I said. The next point is related to the good team management and the review of the remaining activities on monthly basis, and where necessary to remove or add some tasks in the implementation schedule. The final point here is connected to the use of the process improvement opportunities that will save some time. For example, the procurement and the construction of the PCIs in Bulgaria is done in lots by lots, so that the construction of the different lots are done in parallel, thus saving time. Of course, this approach requires more coordination and efforts from the project team, but it works considering the fact that this way the implementation is expected to be completed according to the end dates of the grant agreements. These are my points for the acceleration, for the internal organization, and the good team management that are needed to accelerate the implementation of the projects of common interest. Of course, you can find more information on our project and our procedures on the website.
Thank you, Milena, very much indeed. Found it extremely interesting to hear from you that, it's normal that in big projects the external environment changes and there are surprises nobody thought about. But the way to react to those was this excellent internal organization and the flexibility you had built into the management of your team, and so that was able then to react in a timely manner to the external changes, etc. So I'm sure there is a lot of interest in how you organized the work, and I'm sure there are also many promoters who want to share practice with you and learn from you. So thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. Hopefully there will be then questions later on. The next one on the speaker list is Rosemary. Sure. So please.
I have a very short, just informal number of comments to make around this process. My name is Rosemary Steen, and I'm a director in EirGrid in Ireland. The EirGrid group is the TSO in the Republic of Ireland, but the group also contains the TSO for Northern Ireland, so we operate on both sides of the Irish border. I suppose one of the key things is that we have 2 PCI projects directly under development where we are a developer. But we also, and I deal with the connections, deal with a number of project promoters who are, one is a pump storage project, the other is my colleagues from Greenlink, who were here earlier, and we deal with them as a connector to the grid. So I suppose it's important to remember that projects of that PCI status can come both as a direct developer but also as a connector to the system, and I think that's an important part. I suppose just to say, to congratulate the Commission on organising this event, because I think it's really important in terms of recognising best practice across Europe, and also to perform a form of therapy, if you don't mind me saying, for some of the PCI developers in terms of the challenges that we face. I think it's really important to remember that these are Europe's most important energy projects. And in some ways, the importance of these projects has got lost as it has translated to local level. And I'd just like to talk about a few of our lessons and maybe some practical recommendations that we would like to make. So the first is that I think one of the things that is really good about the PCI regulation is that it sets these time-bound, if you like, periods. Certainly for us in dealing with the regulators, the 6 months that are there for the regulators to come to a conclusion is really important. The problem arises in the cases my colleague has just discussed in regard to the stakeholder engagement and the permitting approvals. And there, those timings are not really working. And so in our experience, we have these 2 PCI projects that we're developing directly. One is the oldest PCI on the list, which is the North-South Interconnector, which is a project connecting the north and the south of Ireland. And the second is the Celtic Interconnector, which is one of the newest. The PCI regulations actually added about 1.5 years to the timeline of the North-South interconnector because we had to re-engage around the stakeholder approvals when that project had actually already done that when the regulation came in. So it caused a further delay to that project. Whereas actually in the case of the Celtic project, the fact that that framework has been able to be applied from the start of that project, I think that's been really helpful in terms of the timing and dealing with the regulators. So I think that the overall framework is working, but I think we would be making some recommendations in regard to examining the stakeholder impact of consultation. And one of the suggestions we would like to make is whether it is possible for the expert bodies that are involved in giving the approvals to join forums like this, so that the importance of the priority of these projects can be explained to the national bodies that are doing the approvals. Because something is getting lost in terms of the priority that the Commission is placing on them, and then we go to the local bodies. I think the regulators understand the priority, but I think the local consenting bodies are struggling to understand why the Commission is perhaps attaching such priority to these projects. And that's something that we would welcome some work on. The second piece that I suppose is really important to us is, if you like, the community engagement piece and the public acceptance piece. When you step through the process, the main problems that we see hitting PCIs at all levels across the European agenda is the approvals and permitting piece. At the moment, that isn't adequately catered for within the regulatory framework. So while the regulators recognise the importance of them reaching agreement on the funding of work on public acceptance to do with the projects, and Celtic is a good example, there isn't a set amount that is allocated, if you like, for public acceptance. Within our country, because the cable will be undergrounded for most of its journey, there won't be a community fund under our current rules. And I do think it would be very important if the Commission would look at whether there should be standardised rules for public acceptance payments for different countries that could be utilised to accelerate these projects. Because at the moment there's a completely different regime for the community on the other side of the project with my colleagues in France. And there is a danger that one community or another community in either jurisdiction will feel that one community is doing better than another. And I think that is something that the Commission could help in terms of setting some framework around. So I also think that at a European level, it would be very important if the Commission could have more of a communications campaign at an EU-wide level, maybe on a social media platform, and I thought the video that was showing earlier was really good, to highlight to the European citizen the importance of the project. In Ireland, because of Brexit, which we are all living through, there's nearly 90% of the public that are in favour of the EU now. It's very strongly supportive of the EU. And I do think that if there was more communications by the European Commission at an EU-wide level on the benefits of these projects, it would help all of the promoters, because I think it would share a common vision, if you like, to the public of why these projects are important, so that would be helpful. And the final point I want to make is that it's clear from this forum that there are a lot of the projects that are coming together, and the impact of that on the supply chain, which was discussed earlier, is going to be quite important. And one of the questions is, can we as a community look at the challenges of what may happen in the supply chain? Could we commission some studies to understand what that might mean in terms of the implementation? And could the supply chain be managed in a way that would accelerate rather than hinder the projects? So that's my final suggestion, Catharina. But just to say to the Commission, thank you very much for doing this. I think it's really important, and we welcome the opportunity to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, indeed. I appreciate very much the suggestions you had. I think they all are extremely relevant, and for sure we will try to reach out for the local authorities next time. I mean, it's important, often they are the decision makers on many aspects, and also in direct contact with the local people, etc. Was very interesting the point you raised on the common approach to the various payments related to acceptance issues, and you know, I haven't given it a thought before. So, but of course, if you have different situations on the two sides of the border, it can easily go to the question on where is fairness and why do we have different approach than my neighbor just a couple of 100 meters from my place. So that's something, of course, when we speak about European projects, we should keep in mind. And then, yes, communication is something that we should do more and we should do better, all of us. And it's something that we should start thinking of how to get the messages from Brussels to where the projects are being implemented. Sometimes it's positive to show the European aspect, and then of course we should do it, but sometimes it can be negative, and then we should be careful. So, but a case-by-case basis, certainly fully agree with that. So, thank you. And then next one to speak is Alexandra, and I understand that we will hear more about procurement, among other issues that you want to raise. So, please.
Thank you, Catharina, first of all, for the opportunity to participate in this panel discussion, and also for such a well-organized event, which basically has given the opportunity to project promoters to showcase their project. I'm going to share with you some experiences and as project promoter of the Melita Transgas pipeline, which is basically our project is offshore pipeline, 150 kilometers, which will connect our island to Sicily, and obviously will end Malta's isolation from the European gas network. This is a very important project, both nationally and at EU level. And what we have done so far, the project promoter was the Ministry for Energy. And basically, we started the project from conceptual stage back in 2014. With the development of the project, we've learned some lessons and experiences which I think you would find interesting. First of all, with regards to public acceptance and stakeholder involvement, well, we tried to do this at as an early stage as possible. We found that this is essential for public acceptance. First of all, for example, the public consultations that is required as part of the pre-application permitting procedure, as required by the TANI regulation. We held about 4 public hearings. We went to local communities, especially in Sicily, and basically we heard what the local people had to say about our project, and we tried to implement the concerns or the issues that they're seeing to make sure that we address them in our environmental studies and our technical studies. Again, with regards to consultations, we went to both the regional and central government authorities. We started from the feasibility stage and continued consulting with each concerned stakeholder throughout the project development. This was done in order to ensure that we provide corrective and we implement corrective actions, thus limiting potential future delays. So I think this was an important approach that we took. As one example of this, basically we tried to get an agreement in principle between the regional authorities and the NGOs on the proposed landing point in Sicily and the onshore route before actually commencing the permitting procedure. As already mentioned by the panel, the setting up of the one-stop shop has proved also beneficial. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to keep the competent authorities, the one-stop shop, updated with all the developments of the project, in order to ensure that when we require their support, when we have some issues that require their intervention and support, we get that as swiftly as possible. Again, political backing is crucial for PCIs. This will obviously speed up the process to get endorsement by member states and for the PCI selection procedure, grant applications, and also when we come to the certification of the actions, status reports and final reports of the grant agreement. We were lucky because obviously the ministry was the project promoter, but I think this point is very important. Well, with regards to publicity, again, we have adopted the approach to try to publicize all critical project milestones that we achieved, and to keep the general public informed of each step of the project using all types of social media. And also we're trying to take some initiatives which will benefit the local communities, trying to create some twinning agreements between local councils, for example, sharing of cultural and educational initiatives between the communities, and this type of involvement of local communities. With regards to the planning and targeting the studies for speeding up the implementation of the project, from the onset of the project, we planned out a sound and realistic long-term plan to ensure that the project develops and a phased approach, basically building from the results of one study to the other. We started with a feasibility study, then we progressed to a basic design, route identification, and which enabled us to proceed to the permitting procedure. So far, this has been proved to be a very structured approach, which obviously will in the long run be beneficial to the project development. We have seen that trying to cut shortcuts may be counterproductive in the long run. So maybe giving more time in the basic design of the project may eventually speed up the project at later stages. With regards to public procurement, we try to go into to have an efficient public procurement procedure, as the ministry didn't have any experience in such projects, so we basically had to subcontract to find the right expertise and contractors to carry out all our studies. Just as an example, last year we managed to award 6 different contracts for different contractors, starting from the environment impact assessment, feed studies, marine surveys, financial engineering. So this was quite challenging, but we try to adopt a clarity in our requirements for the technical specifications, and clear evaluation criteria, which unfortunately, very fortunately, we had no appeals, and basically we managed to get the right contractors within the planned time frame. With regards to the CBCA procedure. We started in the preparation of the investment request. We started at an early stage doing informal consultations with the regulators to ensure that obviously we'll get the CBCA decision as swiftly and without undue delay. Well, that's basically what our experience. Hopefully, once we progress more with the project, we will have other tips which would be useful to other project promoters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I mean, like some of the other panelists, you also highlighted the importance of having the political support to the project, which we have also seen that is one of the key factors. And in your case, it has been very natural. In other cases, as we heard also yesterday, Commission has been one of the facilitating factors in order to build this political support, especially for projects where the benefits are perhaps more on the other side of the border than on the constructing side. So thank you very much for sharing your experience, and we also look forward to hearing the new experiences you will have when the project progresses further. And then our last panelist today is Paul. Then the floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I see I'm the third of a number of colleagues who've come over the 2 days, and I think it's very good that you can see, the visitors can see how the Commission is working in an integrated way, the environment and the energy departments, trying to keep things as smooth as possible. So I'll make my remarks quite succinct. I think the first point to say is that also from an environmental point of view, it is very desirable to have compact, well-planned, well-executed projects. One of the clear risk factors that we see when we get long-delayed historical projects is that sometimes we also get historical environmental impact assessments or nature impact assessments. And then, of course, we are faced with the situation that maybe on the ground, things have changed a lot in the time, and this, of course, is, can then lead to problems when we look at what's actually happening in reality. So also, it's obviously good in terms of these extremely important community projects, but also environmentally, it's good to keep the projects as compact as possible. So how to do that? Well, obviously, the first thing, and this is already made by several of the speakers before me, is to integrate the impact assessment, the water studies, and the nature studies early into the planning work. Why? Well, sometimes some of this work needs to be seasonal. Sometimes, indeed, you need to have a look in a range of conditions. It might be that there are, fire risks, or you need to work when the land is frozen. So it is better to plan all this as early as possible to avoid any surprises. One thing that is a point we always make in DG Environment, but it remains true, that one good way to avoid a surprise in an EIA is to make sure you do a strategic environmental assessment. Yeah, then you're looking at the big picture, and you can evacuate a lot of the cumulative impacts issues, which are often quite significant. And then by the time you get to the EIA, if you've done a good SEA, you will already have done a lot of the sensitive work around, where is roughly the project going and so on. So an SEA can seem like sometimes, well, maybe not obligatory in all circumstances, depending on what the kind of project is, but it can also speed things up. The same message as the previous speaker, shortcuts lead to long delays. And by this I mean, it can be tempting for a project promoter to look at something and say, well, look, if we just squeezed a bit the legislation, maybe we wouldn't need to do an assessment or such, or maybe we don't need to notify that there is going to be damage to the nature which we need to compensate. This is typically then what leads to problems, because you get challenges in the national courts, people see it and they complain to us, and then we're then asked to approve something on European money, and we look at it and we say, legally, this doesn't look good. So it is better, if something comes up that was a surprise, to do a swift but clean remediation of the situation, rather than to pretend it doesn't exist, or to try and get a clever lawyer to read the directive sideways to try and find a way to escape the obligation. So I think that's a couple of key points on not slowing things down. We sometimes get the situation that we have a problem with the conformity of the law in the member states. And the project promoters, sometimes they come to us and they say, this is really unfair, I know the law in my member state is not conform, but still, what do? I don't have any choice. We can find ways sometimes to be a bit creative to ensure that the project itself is in compliance with EU law, even if the member state law is not perfect. I give you one example, which was a consensual example. I think there's no problem sharing it. We had an agreement with the Greek states. There was an issue around the wind farm legislation, so we agreed together with them. We organized a big seminar for all the wind farm promoters interested in Greece. We went through all the legislation, and so even though when it was proving tricky to get the national legislation right, all of those promoters, they knew what they had to do, and so we could sign off. They had done what they needed to do under EU law, even if some of the national legislation wasn't perfect. So there are ways to deal with that. I wanted to deal with, sometimes we get the criticism, yeah, your environmental legislation, you are a conduct or a facilitator for NIMBYs. This is true, but on the other hand, our experience is, when you have someone who has essentially a NIMBY concern, the mere fact that they are able to share that concern and to have the state hear that they are not happy that the park where they used to walk their dog will have a pylon in it, or that the view from their bar garden now has an electricity line. The mere fact that they have been heard generally helps to smooth the project along. The state, in the end, will still have to make a decision. You will have to put the pylon here, or you will have to put the pylon there. But at least those people in whose garden pylon goes, they will have been heard. And so it's true that sometimes these are NIMBY concerns, but still it is better not to avoid them. And I think the only thing angrier than someone who's angry with the pylon in their back garden is they are angry that they did not even get the chance to complain about the pylon. That, I think, was the main points I wanted to make. I think sometimes I was going to say, well, the environment, we see a range of issues. We sometimes see things where we've had some transport projects where people were terribly concerned about the environmental issues, the project promoter, and then they come back to us 12 months later and we say, how was it? Was there any problem? No, but on the other hand, land purchase, or public procurement. So it can vary, but it's often not the main thing. And I wanted to finish with a note of positive, a real positive note. Every year in the EU, we do 16,000 EIA procedures and 34,000 screenings. And most of them go off without a hitch, no problem. So there's no reason why your EIA and your screening should not go well as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, indeed. I think what has also been emphasized by some of the other panelists is that the earlier you do your planning, the earlier you contact the authorities, the earlier you do your public consultation, the easier the rest will be. So I think that's something that is very valuable, and we should keep it in mind when planning a project and planning the steps of the project. And then, yes, I think what I can confirm is that we are working hand in hand with DG Environment, and our environmental legislation is very probably best in the world, and its aims are the same as the aims of the PCIs, to make things improve and then make things better for all of us. So also then the PCIs and the environmental acquis go hand in hand. So we still have time for questions, comments. So who would like to start? You have to wave your hand a lot because I can't see much from the audience. So. Daria, please. Is there a microphone somewhere? It's just in front here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Daria Taurizano. I work for INEA as project manager. Thank you to all the speakers for this interesting introduction. I would like to ask a question to Paul, our colleague of DG Environment, because during his intervention he made a reference to the strategic environmental assessment, and he highlighted this as a potential element for helping the promoters in their preparation for the approval of the environmental permits. And my question is, do you really see a added value for the promoters in using this approach, considering that they have already, to cope with technical difficulties, preparation of the national environmental impact assessment? In case of a cross-border project, they have to comply with the ESPO Convention requirements. On top of that, they have the preparation of the tendering and procurement documents. Do you really see an element of simplification and added value for them in their project implementation to start before the screening with a strategic environmental assessment? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a fair point, and we do often see. I mean, it depends on the project, but there can be several advantages. The first advantage is, of course, you can do an SCA at a more strategic stage. In other words, when the project is less mature. You don't need to know, which type of pylon you're going to use at the point of the SCA. Yeah? This is a later stage. So, for projects that are trying to clear some of the basic obligations out of the way at an earlier stage, this is clearly an option. And it allows you to do things like to set the strategic route, and to have a first consultation on the strategic route. Are you going this way or that way? And this is, obviously one of the clear points of debate, and you can get that out of the way early, and then move on. One of these points of public acceptance. The other point is, one of the factors of conflicts that we see in an EIA is cumulative impact. So you want to build, your pylon in this way, but then you have another one which goes this way. Is the bird going to go over the one and then land in the other? Well, this kind of, that's a simplification, but you get the idea. This kind of issue are very well tackled by the SCA. And you get all of that out of the way, and it can really, particularly where you have different promoters, it can be a good way for more of a member state, in this case, to clear out some of these strategic elements. So I wouldn't say it's a one-size-fits-all solution, but we have seen certainly projects where it has been beneficial and helped speed up then the later work.
Thank you.
Thank you. More questions or comments? So you all had too much for lunch? Yeah, there's a gentleman over there.
Hello, my name is Ruben Pastor from National Grid. We are PCI promoters. So I had a question for Beatrice. It's with regards to the statistics you've presented on studies and works. And I'm conscious that that category of studies with physical interventions. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit more, because sometimes I feel like PCI promoters perhaps don't understand it as well as we could sometimes. And I think it has an element of, at a certain stage of the project, it might be exactly what we are looking at. We've done our initial studies, and we're looking at some further studies, say, in the marine environment, where there might be some physical interventions. So us as PCI promoters have got some grants over that, but it's fair to say that we found the distinction a little bit hard to follow sometimes. So if you could tell us a little bit more about the statistics in terms of how many promoters have used that option, and how do you perceive it in terms of helping PCIs accelerate their implementation? Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? No, thanks for the question. It's an interesting one. I don't have the statistics with me right now of how many studies we have funded with, let's say, concerning physical interventions, but we do have funded a few. where, let's say, as all, let's say, other studies, or as the majority of the studies, as I said before, they've also helped to accelerate the, let's say, the implementation of PCIs. Clearly, they are quite complex because of, let's say, of the physical intervention. First, there is also, let's say, a bit of a higher threshold to get to the physical, let's say, to the grant, in a sense that already in the application phase, you have to comply with a number more, let's say, of environmental documentation that you have to submit in order, let's say, to be eligible, which is not the case for studies applications which do not have physical intervention. So already, let's say, the documentation and the contacts with the competent authority who has to give you, let's say, the permit for the physical intervention has to be proven as well advanced already in the application phase, and this is also already scrutinized by the colleagues of DG Environment. So in that sense, let's say it is already, I would say, as complex as a grant for works application. And what we have seen, if I can recall now, also in the implementation of these studies, of course, they are challenging in a sense that this testing can be, and of course, planning the testing can be challenging for sometimes for the technical solution, sometimes for the weather conditions. So this is where we also have seen, let's say, that careful planning of the physical interventions type of studies is a must, yes. But we have seen, if I remember now correctly, I don't have the statistics with me, both in the electricity and also, let's say, for gas studies. I hope I have replied sufficiently well to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. More comments, questions? It's the last opportunity now. I don't see any further requests. I think there was a lot of food for thought from the presentations, so I'm sure the questions will come then later on, and I'm sure also that all our panelists will remain available to answer your questions later on, be it still here or afterwards by email or in other occasions. So I will then just like to thank the panel for your excellent interventions and the many, many insights on how to accelerate the implementation of projects. And I really look forward then to hearing and working with you to see the full completion of the projects that are, some of which are still ongoing. So thank you very much, and I will then move over there to close the PCI days. You may stay here. Okay, so 1.5 days of PCIs, and I think we'll still have a full room of people listening, clearly concentrated. So I think the first conclusion to be drawn, and perhaps the only conclusion to be drawn, is that it was worthwhile organizing this event. I mean, we started yesterday with the political interventions and political overview guidance on what we are working on. So from the Commission side, from the Parliament side, from one member state with the Lithuanian minister, and also then from the Romanian presidency, where we heard the main framework within which the PCIs have been identified and operate. We also had quite some nice celebrations yesterday with the signature of the grant agreement to provide funding to the first stage of the Baltic synchronization project, which, as you heard also from many interventions in the course of yesterday, is a big, important issue for all of us in Europe. It's only 3 member states we still have left whose grid is operated by a non-EU country. And needless to say how that makes you feel. We also then witnessed the signature of the Marine Declaration that Antonella from RGI had put together with a number of TSOs and NGOs. I mean, from all over Europe, it was really, really nice to see all the different organizations, people who have worked together in preparing the declaration and then so happily and proudly signing it. I think it's a huge piece of work, very important. Commission has been very supportive to it from DG Environment, from DG Maritime, and also from our side in DG Energy. So this kind of cooperation where the project promoters, TSOs in this case, and the civil society, the NGOs, come together to work together on common rules and common practices is extremely valuable, and we would certainly like to see more of such. We then discussed yesterday in 2 further sessions and today in 3 working sessions various aspects on how to implement the PCIs, what are the benefits of it, what is regional cooperation, how can one do that, and what does regional cooperation bring. I think yesterday what I wrote down in my notebook, and I intend to use it more often, is the one from the Estonian ministry representative, Janis, when he said that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think the PCIs are these kind of projects. We want to go far, we want to do good things, we want to improve our energy system, decarbonize, bring renewables. So we want to go far, and therefore we have to go together, which is also the pleasure of it. It's not have to in the negative sense. We have the pleasure of having to work together. And that is all, I think, what the PCIs are about. Even projects that take place in one member state have to demonstrate that they have a cross-border impact. So even such projects, so beyond interconnectors, must demonstrate that there is at least one member state that is impacted positively. So in every project of common interest, there is a need to talk to one's neighbor, to cooperate. And that we see more and more happening naturally. Maybe as an anecdote from something like 7 years ago from the Baltics, because you heard yesterday how well the Baltics cooperate today. I still remember we had an interconnector project and we brought the transmission systems operators together, and they were telling us that, well, this is actually the first time we speak to each other on this project. And we were like, what? Today, these same people tell us that, we are actually meeting our neighboring TSOs all the time, and we don't need Commission anymore to organize the meetings. So, which is a huge reward. That's how we should see all these projects all over Europe go ahead, that people naturally take the phone, ring to the neighboring country TSO and say, hi, I have this project, I have a problem in my country, let's work together because you can help me solve it. So today we have heard a lot of practical implementation related issues stemming from financing to environmental law implementation, how to organize a project, how to finance a project, permitting, etc. A lot of issues which always concern big projects that we are mainly working with. And as we've heard, the issues are similar all over Europe. Solutions can be similar, but we can also then have different solutions depending on the project, depending on the issue, and we can learn again from each other. We don't always need to invent the wheel, if I use this famous saying, because we can, by talking to each other, find out how other people have dealt with similar issues and found good solutions. So that's what I wanted to say as the conclusions, which are more like a broad overview of what we have discussed. So as I said already in the beginning, the only conclusion that I've drawn from this event is that it was worthwhile to organize, and we need to do it again. I mean, the original dream I had was to make this an annual event, and I think I'm confirmed that that's what we should do. And the best timing would be sometime in the autumn, because we have the adoption of the PCI list every 2 years, and that's usually normally in October, November. So the PCI days should actually fit in that timing. So perhaps already now, after the 4th PCI list will be adopted in October, so perhaps right after that adoption we could have already the next PCI days, and then from there on every autumn. And that would counterbalance very nicely with the Copenhagen Forum, which takes place annually as well, around May, June, which focuses then on more the regulatory aspects, how we can improve the regulations, be it on cross-border cost allocation, be it on incentive regulation, etc., also then in support of the project of common interest. And we will have, you have perhaps seen it already, the Copenhagen School of Infrastructure that will work with us to bring the academic insights and ideas also to help implement and develop the PCI policy and projects. Before closing, I have 2 points. The first one is to thank you all for coming, for your interventions, to all the panelists throughout the 2 days, for the very valuable comments, insights, points you have raised. So thank you very, very much for all that input. Then huge thanks to all the promoters, organizations that have presented themselves, their projects in the PCI Garden. I found that fascinating, and the only regret I have is that I did not have enough time to spend in the PCI Garden. So it was fantastic information, fantastic discussions with the promoters. So million thanks, and for next time we will make the PCI Garden part even a more prominent part of the PCI days. Now we had to unfortunately decline some interested TSOs because there were simply physically no space. So that is a part which I think requires and necessitates even more emphasis next time. So million thanks to all those who presented their projects or organizations in the PCI Garden. Then, of course, thank you for the service provider who has organized this event, provided the logistics, the catering, the registrations, etc. I think has worked perfectly well. Many thanks to INEA. There have been a lot of INEA colleagues who have worked with us. I don't know if you want to stand up, because there are many of you, please. Without INEA, we would not have made this event from many aspects, and as you heard already, INEA has this insight, inside knowledge of all the PCIs, which they are now monitoring for us. And yesterday, Dirk Beckers, the director of INEA, presented the transparency platform that has now been updated thanks to the information of the promoters. So please do use the transparency platform to find information on the projects. And then the last thanks go to my team, especially, I don't name all of them, but the whole unit has gone through hell to organize all this. I would just want to name 2 colleagues, Oana and Anne-Sophie. Can you please stand up? You made something that was seen impossible, possible. So you did a miracle, so trillion thanks. And then that's why you have the pleasure of organizing the next one as well. So, yeah. And then just one last point, then, which I think the promoters will appreciate. There should be a slide coming up. The 2019 CEF call has been launched, so today. The information will be on, or is already on INEA's website. So all of you who are interested in taking part in the CEF call in 2019, the information is available, and the call will be open until 13th of June. So you should have sufficient time to prepare your applications. And this year, there will only be one call. The last call for CEF will then be in 2020, and after which then the new multi-annual financial framework will start from 2021 onwards. So thank you very much to all of you once more, and see you next time. I wish you a very nice evening and safe trip. Thank you.